Out of the darkness comes humanity's worst nightmares. Creatures with an appetite to kill and blood in their teeth. They war against truth, love, logic, and goodness. Although these creatures do not simply go bump in the night, nor are they torn from the pages of mythology. They are very real and are closer to home than you think. I'm talking about human beings, namely villains. In this series, we are going to look at some villains, specifically the villains brought to us in the biblical texts. Who were they? What did they do? Why did they do it? And what lessons can we learn? This is Villains of the Bible. One of Satan's tactics that he employs to get us to abandon God's intention for how the human will live is delusion. Satan has used delusion on human beings ever since the beginning of the world, and he continues to use it today. If he can convince you that you are something you actually are not, then you will be more prone to hurt your fellow man and abandon God in order to protect your delusion. Many have been the victims of delusions over the course of human history. However, the first, and I would argue the most consequential in succumbing to delusion, is woman. Satan has carefully crafted delusions specifically for women because, as I said, the delusions they succumb to are the most consequential. Women are the mothers of life on earth, in the same way Eve was called the mother of all living by Adam. They often shape a family, exalt or destroy a nation, and encourage or warp our perception of God Himself. The beauty and order that comes from woman is too powerful for Satan to leave unchecked, so you see he has to twist it into its opposite. Instead of being helpers of man, like it says in Genesis, Satan deludes them into being hinderers. Think of Ahab or Solomon's wives. They did not help their men get closer to God. They pulled them farther away, in fact. Instead of submitting in love to their men, Satan deludes them into ruling over them. And in human history, especially biblical history, the men, to their shame, let them do it. Instead of recognizing God as their sovereign, they twist God to become feminine. Think of all the female deities that appear in the Bible, how when Israel fell into idolatry, they saw Asherah as the wife of Yahweh. In our time, Mary, the mother of Jesus, gets turned into co-redemptrix, and people are fighting over giving God Himself female pronouns. Instead of being the givers of life, women become its destroyers, which leads us to who we were talking about today. A woman who was deluded into thinking the right to the throne of Judah was hers, and to prove it, she would eliminate any who stood in her way. Athaliah. Athaliah was the only queen in Judah's history to take the throne, and she took it for 6 years, reigning from around 841 to 835 BC. Her name, ironically, means Yahweh is exalted. She was the wife of Jehoram, king of Judah, and I think more important to mention here is that she was possibly the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. I say possibly because although we know she was the daughter of Ahab, it is possible that she was the daughter of another wife by King Ahab. The text simply doesn't say. However, regardless of her biological mother, she would have been raised under the influence of Ahab and Jezebel. And Athaliah also shares many characteristics with Jezebel, which makes concluding that Athaliah was actually the daughter of Jezebel well within the realm of possibility. Athaliah's whole reign is symbolic of one of the most unpleasant and unwelcome truths of the created order, especially today, the feminized rebellion of male headship that was appointed by God. Crafted in the background by Satan, this delusion sets out to destroy one of the most precious truths between men and women, the bridegroom of Christ. One could argue that's exactly why marriage was created and why God set up the whole system between men leading and women following. It was all to point to Christ's relationship with his people. So, what happens when that preset gets abandoned by a powerful woman who follows her delusion in taking power instead of building up future men, future leaders, to inherit that power? You get someone like Athaliah. Now, Athaliah was the wife, as I mentioned, of King Jehoram, who was a wicked king in Judah, a king who, according to 2 Kings 8:18, walked in the way of the kings of Israel. When you know what that means, you know how bad it could potentially get, and apparently it did get pretty bad because God judged Athaliah's husband with a terrifying judgment. It says in 2 Chronicles 21:18 through 19 about her husband Jehoram, "And after all this, the Lord struck him in his bowels with an incurable disease. In the course of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great agony. His people made no fire in his honor, like the fires made for his fathers." Athaliah lost her wicked husband, and in his place her son Ahaziah would begin to reign. But he was just as evil as his father Jehoram. So he was judged as well, and he died by God's ordination of it. He only reigned 1 year. This devastating blow is what seemed to accelerate the evil in Athaliah's heart, as evil and pagan as it already was. And it says in 2 Kings 11:1, "Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all of the royal family." That is a very quick verse. So quick that if we only read over it and get to the next verse, we miss the massive implications of what's going on in it. Athaliah, most likely following after the influence of her mother, felt threatened by the imminent loss of her power, not so much about the loss of her son. With her son now dead, her link to the throne, and therefore the influence and the power she had enjoyed for many years, was now gone. Now, this was a problem for her because, being a fleshly woman raised in the houses of pagans, power and influence were all that really mattered in the world. So, what does she do? The same thing many people do in history to secure their power. The same thing Cleopatra did in Egypt to secure power: eliminate the rightful heirs. That's what Athaliah did. But who exactly did she kill to gain this power? Those of the royal line, coming from the line of King David, the only ones that had a right to the throne, which also means something else. These were her own grandchildren that she had slaughtered. A shiver goes up the spine of anyone who has a conscience when I say that, especially mothers and grandmothers. But not Athaliah. She is a villain, and that's what villains do. She is the opposite of God's design for what a woman is supposed to be. You could say she chose her career over her children. The extermination of your own grandchildren for selfishness' sake reaches a level of wickedness and villainy that most of us find quite hard to understand. It's hard to get into the mind of someone like that and comprehend how they could value their own power over their very own flesh and blood. And perhaps in cases like these, it's good that we don't get into their mind too much to see what makes it tick, lest we lose ours in the process. Athaliah, instead of nurturing and raising up those future men, has them killed when they are young. I think something needs to be mentioned here. Just like in our previous villains, while Athaliah thinks she's doing one thing, Satan is in the background doing another. Satan, as we've mentioned before, has had many campaigns against the people of God in human history. And in the context of the Old Testament, it's all for one purpose, a purpose he had in his mind from the very beginning when he was promised by God that one would come from woman to destroy him. His purpose was to destroy the messianic line and keep the Messiah from ever coming. Slaughtering children to prevent the Messiah from coming has been a favorite tactic of Satan. We know Pharaoh did this in the book of Exodus. We know that Herod did this in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And right in the center, we have another one, this time done by Athaliah. But like every time, God steps in to keep his promise. In this instance, the promise, the covenant, that the king would always come from the line of David. That was a promise that was going to be kept. No doubt those faithful to God in Judah would have grown worried over these current events. The question would be, did God fail to keep his promise? Of course, people would be thinking that. But I want to move now to another woman, a woman in the exact same story who is the exact opposite of Athaliah. A woman who mirrors what a woman should be, a preserver of life instead of its extinguisher. Her name is Jehosheba, and it means Yahweh has sworn. She is the sister of King Ahaziah, Athaliah's son, which makes her either Athaliah's daughter or most likely her stepdaughter. It says in 2 Kings 11:2, "But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash the son of Ahaziah and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death. And she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus they hid him from Athaliah, so that he was not put to death." Just like Moses' mother and Jesus' mother, Jehosheba preserves the messianic line by a hair. She hid little Joash for 6 years in the temple, away from the evil of Athaliah. This woman, she had courage. She must have known what Athaliah would have done to her if she ever found out. Now, during these 6 years of the reign of Queen Athaliah in Judah, we don't actually have much detail at all. We do know, however, that it would have been heavily influenced by the evils of paganism, because the Bible even says she instructed her son, Ahaziah, in the ways of King Ahab. And we know how his reign went and what he promoted in the land of Israel. After the 6 years were up, 6 years of terror, 6 years of hiding the rightful heir to the throne, Jehosheba and her husband Jehoiada, who was a priest to God and whose name means Yahweh knows, hatched a very bold plan, a plan of offense, not defense, which is appropriate because most of the time when you're battling the delusional and the selfish, your only option is to be on the offense. They planned a coup, a plan made by a husband and wife whose names are Yahweh has sworn and Yahweh knows. God's way of saying, I swore that I would keep a man from the line of David on the throne, and I know what's happening. God was moving through this husband and wife, which would be a lesson against all villains. Never be on the receiving end of a godly husband and wife when they make a plan against you. The plan consisted of gathering the captains of the Karaites and the guards. Now, who were these people? The Karaites were elite foreign mercenaries, most likely from the Isle of Crete. They were first employed and used by King David himself around 160 years prior. The guards were elite guards from either the temple or the palace. These guards specialized in knowing every square inch of where they were stationed, exactly who you would want in this situation. Now, they would take shifts guarding 3 important places: the king's house, the gate Sur, and the gate behind the guards. This provided strategic advantages. Guarding the king's house would ensure that Athaliah, once she found out, couldn't escape. Guarding the gate Sur ensured that Athaliah's forces couldn't make it through to kill little Joash, and guarding the gate behind them would ensure little Prince Joash would be protected at all sides and at all costs. Every bit of this was planned perfectly planned, even down to what they were to be armed with. 2 Chronicles 23:9 says they were armed with the shields and spears that had been King David's, and they were important. These weapons were housed in the temple, allowing ease of access to them by the elite guards. They were also spoils of war, symbolic of God's victories over his enemies. These were taken by King David, and they were placed in the temple around 160 years prior. So King David, long dead at this point, because of his previous actions and faithfulness to God, provided elite guards and their weapons long beforehand. I guess there's a heavy lesson there on generational impact. The things you do today, without you even knowing it, could benefit your children, your grandchildren, or your great-grandchildren long after you're gone. So live wisely. This is also in stark contrast to our villain, Athaliah. King David provided for his grandchildren long after his death. Athaliah, she kills hers while she's still alive. Now, the moment of truth. It was time to make their move. Delusion versus legacy. They all got into their positions, and they brought out the little prince, heavily guarded. They placed the crown on his head. They placed a copy of God's law in his hands, and they all shouted, "Long live the king." There were so many voices celebrating that it carried to Athaliah's ears. She came out to investigate, and what she saw was her delusion shattering. As with anyone whose delusions get exposed, she got angry. She tore her clothes, and ironically, the delusional traitor Athaliah shouted, "Treason." They all knew that this was going to lure her out. They were counting on it, in fact. With her exposed, they made their second most important move. Jehoiada commanded the guards to take her. They carried her out to the horses' entrance of the king's house, so that no blood would be spilled in the temple, and there the delusion of Athaliah was put to death. The location was very important as well. Although they died in different cities, it was the same type of location where her mother, Jezebel, had also died when she was pushed out of a window and trampled by horses at the gate of her palace. Both women dying outside of their thrones of power. Athaliah's evil and deluded reign was ended. The people tore down the houses of Baal, his altars, his images, and killed his priests. Yahweh was God over Judah once again. And all because one woman, Jehosheba, had the courage to be the opposite of delusion. This final point is quite relevant. What was the legacy of Athaliah? 6 years of terror, slaughter, delusion, and pagan worship. She's not mentioned with great detail, at least, in any other ancient writing or commentary. There's no confirmable archaeology associated with her, or that even mentions her name. She was left as a footnote in history. She's not even mentioned in the New Testament. That is her legacy. Jehosheba, although not mentioned in the New Testament either, has a legacy that is eternal. Because if Joash had been killed by Athaliah, the Davidic line would have ended and the Messiah wouldn't have come, since he was to come from the line of David. This was primarily a tale of two women. One sought to destroy the messianic line, and one sought to preserve it. One acted out of selflessness, and the other one acted out of selfishness. One rebelled against God, and the other was faithful to him. One's legacy was temporary delusion, the other, eternal truth. All you have to decide is which one will you be when your story is ended. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that also will he reap.